Side Part. It's like a book club with your best friend, but make it a podcast. Welcome back, crawlers, to another episode of Side Part. I'm Nikki, your bookish bestie, and today I'm just so excited to travel the third floor of the dungeon with you as we chat about Carl's Doomsday scenario by Matt Dinniman. Remember, you are reading along with me. I have not read ahead in this series, so all my thoughts, reactions, comments, whatever is just based on this book. Something that I have thought about so much since finishing this book is what race and class would I have picked if I even went into the dungeon in the first place. But nonetheless, I think I would have went for like the Amazonian race, like Hekla, or I would have been really cool to be like an elven race, like just be something completely different. And I really have to say this. I'm sorry, Jonah. I love you. And I know you had to do what you had to do, but I feel like being a necrobard would have been pretty sweet. Even if you played the kazoo. But I feel like it would have been really, really cool. I want to know, what would you have chosen? Let me know down in the comments. Friendly reminder, this is an adult book with very dark scenes. I'll do my best to keep it PG-13, but mind your audience at home. I'm also going to be diving straight into the book today. So it's going to be very spoiler heavy for books 1 and book 2. If you are looking for like a spoiler-free explanation and just general vibes, overview, or should I or shouldn't I read this series, please check out my Dungeon Crawler Carl episode. So we got some answers to the questions that I had at the end of book 1. Right away, we get to know what race and class Donut and Carl pick. So we know that Carl is a compensated anarchist primal, which I am excited that he picked a different race. I am not quite sure how this is going to play out. I think it will have implications later on in the books. I think he's going to be able to do some pretty cool things by choosing a primal. I also thought that the classes were so ridiculous and not what I was expecting when we were going to be choosing class and race, but they are so cool. And just reading like the really nuanced descriptions and the way it can really impact their characters. I don't know. It was just like a total nerded out moment for me, but I really, really enjoyed these chapters of the book. I love that Donut so instinctively was like, nope, I'm not changing. I'm just going to be a cat. And then this is when we also learn, though, that Odette, that little, in the epilogue of book 1, she kind of hinted that they're going to have to do something that's going to make somebody mad. And we could only assume it was going to probably be Mordecai. They don't know that many people in the dungeon that they care about their reaction to something. But she's looking for this manager kind of component to one of the classes that she picks. So she picks former child actor. And so now she's a former child actor cat. But we quickly find out that there's a lot of perks to choosing this class in this race. And so I'm excited to kind of see how this plays out moving forward. I kind of wish she would have picked a race that would have added to her constitution, maybe given her a little bit more strength. But nonetheless, I was pretty happy with these selections. They also get to pick some subclasses, they get to pick subclasses on the 6th floor. So I am so excited for that. I don't know if that's in the next book, though. But you know what? I will find out because I am binging these books very, very, very quickly at this point. To piggyback off the class and race selection, though, obviously Odette gave Carl and Donut some advice, and they kind of, conspired to make it look like a flippant decision on Donut's part. But ultimately, Donut's decision really did not sit well with Mordecai, but he thought it was just her picking something because it looked shiny and fancy. And that's been a big theme in these books is Donut, kind of fronts like she doesn't care, and we'll get to that later, but really she's always kind of plotting in the background. And we know that the whole intention when they were doing class and race selection was to get Mordecai to be their manager so he could be more involved in their game and help kind of protect them through the dungeon. Now, why did Odette want this? And obviously it's good for ratings to have Carl and Donut survive, sure, but something's happened when Mordecai becomes a manager. So we know he's going to be heavily compensated, more than if he was just like in the tutorial guild. So cool, it benefits Mordecai. But there's just like kind of this uneasy feeling. Like Odette's character, I feel like we've only gotten like a superficial view of her, but it feels like there's more there for me. I feel like she's not totally good or totally bad. She's very morally gray, right? And poor Mordecai, he has so many issues that he's working through, and you can see he's very, very triggered by Odette. We also know that she watches him constantly. She let that slip, right, to Donut. But what is her motivation? Like, I know she obviously cares about Mordecai. There's a history there. Is her whole intention of helping Donut and helping Carl to just inadvertently help Mordecai? Is she actually a good person? I don't know. I have questions. We also, one thing we find out from her show too, that I feel like isn't quite related, but it is related, is that all the top rated players have like a bounty on their head, and other crawlers get rewarded if they take him out. So there's just so many things with these two characters who Mordecai is actually pretty heavily featured, and he's a pretty integral part of their party now that he's their manager. But I just feel like Odette is going to become a much bigger part in this story. Some more answers. We know what's happening with Meadowlark, kind of. But we have an update. They are still hopping around the dungeon, and they're leveling up. That's really good news. Mrs. McGivens, in fact, is level 13 somehow. I do think we're going to see more of them in the future. I do think Carl will potentially kind of find a way to, meet up with them again. I am dying to know what race and class they all picked, because Brandon let us know it was a very arduous process, because obviously staying human would mean they'd be more vulnerable in the dungeon. So that's something I'm really looking forward to, is kind of meeting up with them, seeing what they all turn into and how they're leveling up, and it sounds kind of morbid, but like, who's left? Anyway, unintentionally, I think I'm starting a new segment on my podcast called New Vocal Stems because of Dungeon Crawler Carl. And after book 2, I have a few to add to the list. So one of my first ones, I'm going to try to do it justice. Hi, Seth. And second, in addition to Goddammit Donut, we have a new variation, and it's Goddammit Mongo. And last, Mama needs a night off. Which leads perfectly into my next segment, favorite Carl and Princess Donut moments. I think one of my favorite moments was when they're traveling to the Desperado Club, and Donut's kind of picking Carl's brain about what beverages Miss Beatrice used to like to drink. And Carl says to Donut, cats don't drink cocktails. And Donut says, cats don't shoot lasers from their eyes either. But here we are, Carl. Mama needs a night off. And I have found myself saying more than once to my kids or my husband, Mama just needs a night off. And I don't know, this book, there's just like these little phrases that just stick in your brain like glue. There's also at the end, when they're about to be blown to smithereens, Carl's and Donut are kind of just sitting there, and I feel like this happens more often than they would like, but there's always these moments where they're facing death, and Donut kind of goes to Carl. She says, I'm not as dumb as I pretend to be. I know she's dead. And Carl says, I know. And he wraps himself around her. And it's just like this really tender moment. And this is significant because we know Carl has this flashback during the book. I can't remember exactly at what point, but it's when Carl's holding Donut in a separate room, and he overhears this conversation with Beatrice and her mom. And basically, Beatrice's mom is really convincing Beatrice to downplay her intelligence, and that men feel very threatened when women are intelligent. And actually, that made Carl mad. And he's concerned for Donut, that she's kind of following in her footsteps and doing that as well. And he doesn't like it, which is such green flag behavior. Oh my gosh. But we know that even if Donut acts flippant, like she kind of validates it at the end of this book. Like, I'm really actually smarter than I let on. And so I'm actually also very excited to see how her character continues to develop and become more confident in her intelligence. And I think there's a lot of times when she's on like these reality shows, especially, where we see that she is confident and witty, and she can come up with these comebacks like nothing. And that doesn't happen because you're unintelligent. It happens because you're very smart and you can think on your feet. So I'm excited to see her character continue to grow. But going back to that scene, I'm very concerned about Carl's Doomsday scenario. We find out in this book that Carl's Doomsday scenario is not a scenario. It's actually a very volatile explosive enclosed in an enchanted Beanie Baby container. And it's just chilling. It's just chilling in its inventory. At any moment, it can just, wild. But we get a glimpse at the magnitude of the monsters in the lower level in this book earlier on. So I can't remember the context for that. I think it's when they're watching one of the replays of what's going on in the dungeon, and it flashes forward to like a lower level where they're just battling this insane monster. And so obviously it's like this foreshadowing moment where like, okay, Carl at his current level, there's no way he could fight something like this. So obviously there's going to be a need for maybe a larger weapon, but I have no idea how he would even use it. And so, a lot of times I feel like when I'm trying to explain this book to other people, like things that are happening in this series, it sounds insanely chaotic and it sounds completely made up, almost like I'm just trying to make things up on the fly to make it more interesting. And this book, it never ceases to give me just endless things to think about and wonder, how does this author come up with like any of this? It is truly amazing. But also sidebar, we also, through this entire like end crazy event with the Doomsday scenario, we get a little glimpse, I should say, into celestial boxes and how they can impact the game. And we also have something else highlighted because of these celestial boxes. We know that they obviously provide amazing loot, so cool, but they're also heavily taxed by the syndicate. And they could potentially bankrupt the Borant Corporation because there's been precedents of this before in earlier dungeons where there were too many celestial boxes administered and the corporation that was hosting the dungeon went bankrupt. So we learn all this on Odette's show at the end of the book, but you're just like kind of having like these like, oh my gosh, moments where you're like, there's so many layers. Not only everything's happening in the dungeon and there's politics in the dungeon, but then there's also this just kind of political environment that's on the outside that's also very important about what's happening on the inside. Wild. It's just a little bit crazy. It's like, I'm sorry, can you hear my brain breaking right now? I think it's actually melting down. But speaking of shows, we were talking about Odette's show and then learning about the celestial boxes. I think one of my favorite things about this series is just the utilization of these talk shows to give us nuggets of information. I love how the author, obviously he has to tell us information through Carl, but there's a lot of like showing these really complex dynamics through these environments and like these talk shows, which I think is just such a fun way for the readers to absorb it, because it's almost like you're watching the talk show in real time and you're learning things as Carl's learning them. And my brain's going to continue to explode. For example, there's so much that happens on Ripper Wonton's show. Wow. I'm going to try to break this scene down as best I can, and I will probably trip up, so please correct me in the comments. But essentially, Carl is insulting King Rust and the Skull Empire, and then they get really mad, and I guess there's like a legal precedence with the syndicate, like if you openly challenge a government, they have the right to attack you. So obviously they launched their attack on Carl and Donut, but because Manasa switched trailers with Carl and Donut so they could clean themselves up, they were in the wrong trailer. So they end up attacking Manasa, who is actually like one of the parasitic entities that also make up the Valte Corporation. So I don't believe she was part of the Valte Corporation, but she was the same race as the Valte Corporation. So they took it as a direct attack. So then they launched their attack against the Skull Empire, who, if you haven't caught up by now, because this is like kind of crazy, is also the kind of royal family that Prince Maestro is a part of. So when the Valte Corp launched their attack, they launched it against like one of the other Earthbound, I think it was like a yacht or something. I think they call them yachts. So Valte Corp launches their attack against the Skull Empire to kind of avenge Manasa's death. And then that ends up killing Prince Maestro and the Queen Consort. Now, I do not believe Prince Maestro is out of the series. I could be wrong. I've been wrong before, but I think he is still going to be coming back in a later book. And I don't know if Sorry. I don't know if he's quite like dead. So now there's this open feud between the two, which is very good for the Borant Corporation, which is the Kuatin. So now there's like this open battle over here between the Valte and the Skull Empire, and the Valte Corporation is now very busy. So now the Borant Corporation, who's hosting the dungeon, that alleviates some pressure from the Valte Corporation, pressuring them about their debts. So like I said, there's all these politics going on, but it's really, while it does impact the dungeon, it's like this whole separate like side story going on. And then we also learn that there's these deep storylines in the dungeon. There's storylines that span dungeons, not only just for, you know, various networks to kind of host these, you know, entertainment type shows, but there's just like these NPCs that are part of these quests that have been like created solely for these quests. But Grimaldi's Circus kind of was like the first moment where I'm like, this is like intensely dark. And there's such like this rich, sad storyline. And we're left questioning just that while these characters were created for the dungeon, are their experiences any less real? But does it make Heather the Bear's any less tired and just exhausted? Does it make Cygnet's loneliness and isolation feel any less lonely? We also see this with Gum Gum. Gum Gum. If you listen to the audio, this character felt so sweet and so genuine, and she was so authentically worried and just wanted to help and wanted things to feel safer for people in her community. And I know she was a side quest, but are those feelings any less real? Are these feelings less real because she just existed inside the dungeon? Yes, they're NPCs. I know they are, but it just starts to make you question everything. Like it's truly like, I keep saying this is breaking my brain, but it is, because, you know, when I think of an NPC in a video game, you know, you kind of just think of like the, hi, how are you? And then, you know, they repeat the same 4 phrases and you only have 3 options to talk to them. But like in this book, in this lit RPG, these characters are rich and nuanced, and they have personalities, and they don't just repeat the same 4 things. Like they actually, like the entire story unravels based on like what you choose to do. And yeah, like the system tries to set it up so like there's kind of this expected outcome, but we see time and time again like Carl tends to break that and go about things his own way. And to piggyback off that, we really see how well Carl's just adapting with this game. I mean, if he can exploit this game in some way, he's going to do it. He's going to do it, which I low-key love that about him. But he negotiates to be a regular on Vengeance of the Daughter in order to gain favor, not only from producers, but kind of the people running the game. Like there's incentive to keep him on or keep him alive in the dungeon because he's a regular now on this show with Cygnet. So, I mean, that was a smart move on his part. He's thinking on his feet, but he's thinking about longevity in this game. And we see time and time again, he just chants, you will not break me. And that's become his mantra now throughout the last 2 books. He also notices objects, and I think this has to deal with like his schema from playing video games. He kind of notices when the game wants you to pick up something, right? And we see this with like, various explosives, but also with the Beanie Baby case, how it was kind of, you know, a little too obvious, and he picked it up thinking, I'm probably going to need this for some reason. But he's always thinking ahead. He's plotting, and he's also very, very angry, and rightfully so, right? I mean, like, I don't know any person who would be plucked from their life and put in the situation and they would just be cool with it. But we see him, I think the exact phrase he used was like planting seeds. And he's trying to, like, for example, like when he's on the show and he's kind of trying to incite the Skull Empire to be overthrown, which kind of lands him into a little bit of hot water. I'm interested to see how that's going to play out at a lower floor. But it's just really cool to watch him kind of use his inventory in such an adept way. And then also, with that, I think it was a really intentional choice of Matt Dinniman to make the inventory unlimited, because I think sometimes when you're playing a video game, like you almost have to like level up to increase the weight of items you can hold in your inventory, where Matt Dinniman was like, day one in the dungeon, he's like, it's unlimited, loot everything, like, right? But it also leads to some really interesting situations and storylines because it's unlimited. Like in book one with Agatha, if they didn't have unlimited inventory, there's no way Carl would have just picked up her shopping cart. And that would have, like, he wouldn't have discovered the things he discovered had the inventory not been unlimited. So it's just interesting. You think a lot of this stuff is really haphazard and chaotic, and this book kind of feels like a toddler telling a story, and I've heard that somewhere. At the end of the day, I think a lot of these choices are really intentional. I think we're supposed to feel very confused while reading it. As Carl gains more clarity, we gain more clarity. And I feel like we're going to become more, I guess, confident in this story as we move through because it's intentionally written that way. And I think that's one of the beautiful things that Matt Dinniman has done. And I'm here for it. I'm here for it. I can't stop reading these books. I think I read this one in 3 days. There's also some really fun millennial coded moments that I also think were very intentional. And I think this author knows his audience very, very well. So for example, one of the coordinated moves that Donut and Carl have was called Slime Time. And if you were a fellow Nickelodeon fan, you would have gotten that reference really quick. And the fact that the Skyfowl, Miss Quill, had a horde of Beanie Baby type creatures with the tag still on. That's an important note. And then she also had like little glass cases to showcase some of them. And I'm like, this is the most 90s millennial coded thing ever. And I love it. I just love it. I love every minute of this book. Speaking of Miss Quill, let's chat about her for a second. It is insanely like dark and twisted, like the things she did at the end of the story, sure. But you cannot convince me that she was more invested in the side quest than she was in those Beanie Babies. I mean, anyway, let's also chat about the side quests themselves. They are just like absolutely frying me. I know this isn't the case, but I almost feel like I'm in a tavern with like a lute playing in the background and someone strolls up. It's like, will you help me, good sir? I think the part that cracks me up is like you kind of have this image of like what a side quest feels like just based on playing like different games like Skyrim or whatever. And then my favorite part though was like when I think they were in the Desperado Club, but when someone walks up, obviously with the side quest, I think it was Gum Gum at the time, and then Mordecai's like, no, like F off, essentially. And it just is like so funny because I think you can relate if you're someone who's played video games, when you're just like really grinding or trying to like build up your skills and you just have these randos coming up to you with like these really boring side quests you have absolutely no interest in, or wouldn't really be conducive to like what you're doing at that point in the video game. It really feels like how you feel in this book. I also think it's equally funny that like Carl's savior complex can't help but be roped into these side quests. And he keeps like referencing like, okay, we're done. We're going to start grinding and really leveling up our skills. But ironically, because he kind of gets himself into these pickles, he ends up leveling up his skills anyway. Especially at the end of the book, like what they did made them level up like crazy. So I don't know, all kind of evens out in the end, I guess. I also think Mongo's evolution might be one of my favorite things in this entire book. I mean, this murder chicken just grew so insanely fast, and he is not tiny anymore. The pace he grows is both comical, but also really important to like the overall plot. Had he still been a chicken size, he couldn't have defended Donut when she was put into a stasis from, I think it was called like the water lily spell. But because he was so big, he really protected her, and we got to see their relationship grow. So not only do we have like this dynamic between Donut and Carl, but now, Donut's firmly in her mommy era, and I love her relationship with Mongo and just watching her kind of blossom in this maternal role. I'm also super stoked he got like the pet carrier Pokeball thing. I was so hoping we were going to get to see that in this book, and we did. And they use it a ton and very functionally, and I think it really helped Mongo. I think there was one point they referenced he wasn't resting when they went to like the safe rooms, and he almost needed to be in it. So that was kind of cool. I actually really appreciated that part. And again, the millennial references to like Pokemon. I mean, how could you not love this book? When we're wrapping up this book and we're focusing on the ending, I think the ending really shows Carl's and Donut's desire to put humanity over progression in this dungeon. Like, yeah, they want to keep surviving. Yes, they want to keep progressing, but not at the expense of who they are and what they stand for. And I think that is, like, it's a beautiful message, truly. But at the end, they chose to take a huge risk in order to save not only the crawlers, but the NPCs. There was such a focus on the NPCs getting them into a place where they were safe. And, you know, Carl's continually checking in with Mordecai, like, is everyone good? Like, are the NPCs safe? And I just think it's so telling of their characters that not only are they caring of other crawlers, and like Donut even references, I don't want any of those ugly skulls next to my name, but they truly are starting to recognize that like these NPCs are just as much victims as they are, and they care about their well-being, regardless if they were created solely just for this dungeon. I also, this is not related, but kind of, I thought it was so funny that they opened up like a Discord type chat, and like unintentionally, Donut became the mod of the chat, and someone was just being rude, obviously. And she kicked them or blocked them. I don't know what term they use, but it was just hilarious. And I don't know. I would not be doing this book justice if I didn't mention it. And I also think a few more honorable mentions that I have. It's hilarious that Donut's special talent essentially is like patch collecting / identification. And it also comes in handy. And I thought it was so cool how the author wove that into the story in an organic way. And obviously you could look up the definition of what their abilities were early on. And I did use that Kindle function, so I knew what it was. But he shows you rather than tells you what it is and lets you figure it out as the story goes on. And I loved that. The Desperado Club also seems super cool. I was a little bit nervous it was going to be a letdown, and it is not. I'm glad about that. And also, the legal disclaimers in this book are so funny, but they are really confusing to me throughout the entire first book. Like, what crawler is going to be obtaining legal counsel and taking action against a word corporation? Is that even feasible? But then you start realizing that there's this entire political structure outside of the dungeon. Even higher than the people hosting the dungeon is the government, like the syndicate. And essentially these legal disclaimers are to protect them against the syndicate, like for them, you know, so they don't get prosecuted. But then you start wondering, you're like, they have like the weirdest moral code. It's like, so obviously there's some things they're like protecting against, and they have all these like acts, but then nonetheless they plop these people in a dungeon and they're trying to call them at a rapid rate, and you're just like, where is this like weird moral line that you have? That's my question. I digress. But another honorable mention is Donut like casually forgetting to tell Carl to put his boxers on before they descended the floor. And so he had to make a toilet paper loincloth before going on a death show. I think her ability to withhold information at some of the most key moments is not only intentional, but insanely funny. So thank you for that, Princess Donut. I also feel like, and I've talked about this a little bit, but the author is intentionally making these books feel confusing, but kind of like as if you were starting a video game and you had to learn all the mechanics and just the storyline, and it's all brand new and fresh. And I do feel like I have a lot more clearer picture just in the second book. And I was told like the first, I think it's either 3 or 4 books are truly about the world building and building out the game. And then like a lot of the emotional stuff comes later on. And so if I'm enjoying this part so much, I can't even imagine how much I'm going to love it when we get to more of the emotional like storyline pieces later on. I also do feel like these books are just meant to be binged. I mean, I'm listening to them and I'm also reading them. So during the day, I'll kind of just listen for a couple hours just because I like to hear their voices. I like to hear Donut and Carl talking to me. I think the voice actor is just phenomenal for this book. I actually thought it was different people that were voice acting. And then I realized, I saw like a TikTok and I realized it's just one guy and he is phenomenal. And even though I really like to just read physically on my Kindle or like a physical book, this is like truly an audio that is just so well done. I can't not listen to it. I need to listen to it partially just so I get the vibe of the book. To wrap up, there's some like looming questions that I have at the end of book 2. So one, why does Hecla want Donut? That feels random. I mean, obviously they watch the dungeon show, so they get to see Donut. So maybe, I don't know, does she want her as like a prize? Does she just think she's really cool? Because I think she's really cool. Anyway, also, is it just me, or does the AI feel like it's kind of working against Boran? Is the AI a victim too? Am I starting to like sympathize with AI? I really hope not. Lastly, what is going on with Donut? We know she removed the tiara. We know that has some implications. We know it's fleeting. We know it's going to impact some of her abilities. We also know it could force the curse to be placed on someone else and placed on another party member. So what's going on with that? I have questions. And we also know that Carl has an insane explosive device in his inventory that could kind of break everything. How will he use it? What is that going to look like? I want to know. And last but not least, are you ready to go down to the next level? Because we're starting the Dungeon Anarchist Cookbook next week. And as always, the best way to support this podcast is by leaving a comment. So please, if you've made it this far, drop a bear emoji in the comments in honor of Heather the Circus Bear. Rest in peace. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe to this channel. Click that bell to get alerted when I post a new episode. And just thank you so much for crawling with me today. See you next week. Bye-bye.